The San Diego Museum of Man's Instruments of Torture features such iconic implements from the last 4 centuries as the Iron Maiden, the rack, and the guillotine. All of the artifacts come from the Museum of Torture in Italy. The two museums previously collaborated on a similar exhibit more than a decade ago, says Rex Garnowitz.
I think that our perspective on torture has changed significantly since this was brought here in 2000. And part of that has been the effect of the terrorist attack on America on 9/11. And we wanted to talk in this particular version of the exhibit about our capacity to torture other people.
Garnowitz is the Chief Operating Officer for Programs and Collections. He points out that the exhibit's title does not merely refer to the artifacts on display.
We're the instruments of torture. We were in the Middle Ages. We are today.
The museum has a mission to inspire human connections by exploring the human experience. And torture is a dark part of that experience, but an important aspect to try and understand. Garnowitz says the medieval instruments of torture are not just relics from the past.
I originally started talking about this component, these medieval instruments, as a slice in time, but I realized they're not a slice in time, that some of these techniques of torture have continued to today.
Kathy Anderson is Executive Director of Survivors of Torture International.
The latest report by Amnesty International notes that 101 countries currently use torture on a systematic basis, and that there are survivors from having been tortured. Some do remain in their countries, but many have to flee for their own safety, and they go to countries of safe haven, such as the United States, and specifically to San Diego, as we're on the busiest border crossing.
I had no idea there were so many survivors of torture in San Diego. Over 11,000 survivors of torture in San Diego County is actually about the same number of torture survivors as homeless people. You see the homeless all the time, and they're visible, but the survivors of torture are invisible.
So the museum wanted to place the exhibit in a contemporary context for visitors.
When they walk into the exhibit, actually the first panel shows the bombing of the Twin Towers. It elicits sort of an emotional response from people. We've been attacked. And the reason for doing that is we want to explore our capacity as individuals to torture other people. We say that we won't torture, but if we're put in the right situation, we do torture. And being attacked as a country, I think, made us feel like we would do anything to prevent this from happening again.
And so you get the ticking time bomb scenario that's played out in the media,
where you have this limited amount of time, you have a terrorist suspect in custody. Would you torture that person to save the lives of 10,000 other people? And that sort of moral dilemma that you're faced with makes you sort of make an emotional decision. Like, yes, I would torture that person to save all these other people.
Prior to 9/11, we as Americans always said torture is horrible. And that is not a value of our country. It is not part of who we are. It's not our character. 9/11 happened. And then there were conversations about, I wonder if torture is okay or not. We as an organization, we always say torture is never, ever okay.
The exhibit highlights instruments of torture, like the Spanish Inquisition's interrogation chair that was designed to elicit information from victims. But Garnowitz says the exhibit dispels the myth that torture is mainly used to gain information.
90% of the cases of torture, they don't want any information from people at all. They just want to instill fear.
And to use fear to control people. Devices like Scold's bridle were used specifically on women.
They were used to keep women in domestic servitude in the Middle Ages. So if you spoke up against authority or took a stand against an issue, you could actually be subjected to some of these really horrible tortures that you see in the Middle Ages. All of these public humiliations are used to control populations and to keep people from speaking up. And I think it's important for us to reflect upon that and see that that happened in the past in order to prevent it happening in the present.
By allowing people to see some of these real devices makes an impact that photos and videos simply can't convey. Garnowitz felt that emotional impact firsthand.
This is actually the object that I find the most disturbing out of this entire exhibit. They're saws that were used to saw people in half. And that seems like it's bad enough in and of itself. But when you read the stories, people were hung upside down so that blood would remain in their heads and they'd remain conscious for a longer period of time. So the amount of thought that went into some of these forms of torture and cruelty is really unbelievable to me.
I think people are genuinely interested in this topic and they want to know more. So I'm really glad that the museum has chosen to have the exhibit here in San Diego to continue the dialogue.
What we wanted to do is at the end of the exhibit, allow people to see some light at the end of the tunnel. So these are some things people can do to stand up against torture. We look at the bystander effect and how we tend to be bystanders and how we can be upstanders. And some of the upstanders that are highlighted on that panel are ordinary people.
That's the message the museum wants people to leave with, that we all have the ability to stand up against torture. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.